What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp here, managing editor of Fightful.com, here for the Fightful MMA podcast. We got a big week ahead. We got Bellator, UFC. On the WWE side of things, there's the Hell in the Cell pay-per-view. So lots of stuff going on at Fightful.com. Definitely check out the website, the forums where you can talk any of that stuff, video games, entertainment, really anything you want. We have not necessarily a new face. If you've ever followed MMA, you know who this guy is. If you followed Fightful, you know who this guy is because he's been on the program before. But James Lynch. James, you're the toughest guy to nail down, but you work everywhere.
Yes, I guess that is a good way of putting it. Yeah, no, I'm very happy to be here, and obviously very happy to be a part of the Fightful MMA, Fightful Online squad, man. So it's glad to be here. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're a guy that we've always wanted on the site, and we're, of course, very glad to have you. And there's tons to talk about, dude. Like, there is a ton.
I know.
Bellator 184. Yeah. Yeah, between Bellator 184, UFC 216, Conor McGregor speaking publicly is always a story. The UFC rights, we've had a ton of fights announced. What do you think was the biggest item of news outside of course, the unfortunate situation in Las Vegas, but as it pertains to MMA of the week, what do you think the biggest story was?
I'm going to go a little bit off the radar here, but I think the story that sort of popped out to me, I mean, don't get me wrong, this card on Saturday for the UFC is going to be great. Bellator is going to be great, but I think it's actually what Rory Macdonald said about Bellator. That seems to be the big talking point, is that he, is not 100% happy with the promotion not booking him, frequent fights. And I think this is something that, is sort of overshadowed this week, in my opinion. I mean, you do have the interim title fight and, the media and this and that, but that's sort of the one story that really kind of stuck out to me, because he was the big name. Like, you look at all the free agents that Bellator got, he was sort of the one where I think a lot of people went, why did the UFC let this guy go? And now he's unhappy, apparently. So that's very interesting, in my opinion. Yeah,
pretty early on for him to be feeling that way as well. And when he signed the contract, he was the one that initially said, okay, I'm signing this deal, but I'm not fighting until next year. Apparently, he hasn't fought as much as he would like to. That's not something you necessarily hear a lot of, like, on the record as it pertains to Bellator. It's something you would hear a lot out of World Series of Fighting. There were guys who had to retire because they weren't getting fights. That is a situation that happens there. Now, occasionally you might hear that because, like a Steve Cazzola, who I know that we've both spoken to, when he originally left Bellator, he just wasn't getting fights. To me, when you've got guys like Steve Cazzola, like Rory Macdonald, not only who can put on exciting fights, but are willing to fight in multiple weight divisions, there's really no excuse to not get them a fight.
Yeah, and it is a little weird, isn't it, that they're not, finding spots for these guys. They seem to have a weird strategy when it comes to the different markets. Like, you see, like, a New York card like they have, and they stack the deck with that, and then they sort of have these cards that are more sort of regional based. Because, I mean, Sean, there's been some cards that Bellator's had that just have not been that strong, and you have to wonder, why aren't they using, some of their bigger names? And, Canadian bias aside, I still don't know why they haven't come up to Canada yet. You've got a bunch of Canadian fighters on the roster: Valerie Letourneau, Rory Macdonald. They signed Mandel Nallo, who's a huge lightweight prospect that trains at a TriStar. Why are they not going to these markets and trying to get these guys fights? Because, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, I mean, like I said to Showdown Joe on our Holy Smokes MMA podcast this Tuesday, I wouldn't put it past them to run that show. And they do have like 4 or 5 people from Canada on the roster. But, they're going to sign like a David Loazo or somebody just to throw on that show, like just to do it, to bring in a couple of asses to put in those seats. I will say that their outlook through the end of the year is a little bit better. A little bit better. I love the show on Friday. I think that is an excellent show. Not only that, they're putting a lot of guys who have history with one another on the same show, which I thought was really interesting. And you got Musashi versus Shlemenko. That's a good fight. And before King Mo fell out, that was a decent fight. They had him booked against McGeary. I was very interested in that. Heather Hardy's on that show, and Heather Hardy's a name that I think that if she had found combat sports 10 years ago, we might be talking about her instead of Ronda Rousey as the one who kind of pushed it into the forefront. But she's a good name. Then they got Bader and Vassell. They got Davis on that show. They got a women's flyweight title fight. Zach Freeman, Ed Ruth. So I think they're starting to do a little bit better, but I'm wondering, like, why did it take 3 years into Scott Coker's run to do this? Because I thought that those types of cards that you spoke about were what they were trying to get away from with when they canned Rebney.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it seemed like you would see a lot more frequency of events. I just think that, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like after New York, they've lost a lot of momentum. I mean, I was at New York for that card. A lot of people were talking about the fact that they were, neck and neck with the UFC in terms of interest. It seemed like a lot of people were really into the Bellator card, as far as the name value on there. And then after that, we haven't heard much. And, they've had a couple cards. I know they had the Campos-Gertz, trilogy fight on that card.
You can't run that as your follow-up. You can't run.
Exactly.
Campos-Gertz in Thackerville, Oklahoma as your follow-up to New York City.
Yeah, like get Rory in there. I know Rory fought in May, but get him on that card. He's your biggest guy. One of your biggest stars on the card. You got to keep these guys active, especially because they're familiar names. If you're a casual fan, you know Rory Macdonald because he fought for the title and everything else.
And with all due respect to Ben Sargent, I love the guy. He looks like Matthew McConaughey. Sounds like him too. That was their next card. It was one of those Monster Energy Series shows, but I barely know when they're even having those.
Well, they don't televise them. They're just they have no. It's like one of those things where I think they just have a partnership. I think it's with like the Motor Speedway or whatever, and they just do these sort of cards that they don't televise, and they happen, and they're mainly cards comprised of guys from a particular scene. I know for this card in particular, that the last one, it was a lot of Valor Fights competitors that were on that card. So that's, I think, sort of a one-off. I'll give them that. They can get away with those. That's fine. But but I mean, like you said, you can't follow up a New York card with a very lackluster event like we had with Gertz and Campos, which was actually a pretty good card, but name value wise, it didn't have a lot of interest.
Well, their August show I thought was a decent, like as it pertains to fighters and matchups. I thought that was an interesting card. When you've got like Karakanyan on the prelims,
right?
Man, that's a weird guy to throw in the prelims when you have some of the cards that you have. But I think that things are looking a little bit better throughout the end of the year. But with Rory stepping up and saying, "Hey, I'm here to get paid and I'm here to fight," I hope they do that because I want to see these guys fight more than once or twice a year. Cole Conrad retired because this company didn't get him fights and he wasn't making money well enough. I mean, they've had a real problem holding on to their own champions in the past. I don't know if not getting one of your big stars fights is the right way to go. But, yeah, that's an interesting one. And speaking of that 170-pound division, we got a guy in Carlos Condit, and the UFC just last week was like, hey, BT Dubs, I'm back. Let's get a fight going. And he's got a fight, and it's against Neil Magny.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this matchup. I mean, anytime you watch Carlos Condit fight, you're going to tune in. That's for sure. I guess the thinking here is they want to give Condit, a win, to kind of get back. Nothing against Neil Magny, very talented guy, but this sort of is what this matchup feels like to me. But you're telling me a guy in Carlos Condit, you don't want to give him another brawler, a guy that's really going to, like even like a Mike Perry would be kind of interesting just to put him in there. I don't sort of know the matchmaking on this one other than trying to get Condit a win. But I think if Condit doesn't have that many fights left, I mean, it sounded like he was going to retire after the last fight. You give him these exciting highlight reel fights, and I don't really think Neil Magny really screams that to me. What do you think?
I definitely don't think he's a given win. I'm done guaranteeing that people are going to beat Neil Magny at this stage because, man, the guy keeps finding a way to make himself relevant and make himself a threat. And against the Carlos Condit, where we don't necessarily know where his motivation is at, he hasn't won in 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. Before that, he beat Martin Kampmann, but he's got 2 wins in 5.5 years. So, now that can be disputed because many people think that maybe one of those fights, a couple of those fights.
Lawler, I thought he beat Lawler personally, but
So I mean, he can hang in there with anybody, but still, I say that, and he didn't hang in there with Damian Maia. He got submitted right quick and then disappeared, fell off the face of the earth for over a year.
Yeah, that was a disappointing fight for sure. I think that fight, I mean, they put that as the main event on that Vancouver card, if you remember, and I think people were expecting it, to be one of those things where can Condit, win with the striking? Can he take this deep into the waters? And it was just, no, it's over. He submitted, and very surprising result. But I'm going to flip this over the other way. You look at Magny. I mean, he had a really incredible run. I believe it was that run from 2014 to 2015 before he fought Damian Maia. But if you look at him since, look at these wins here. I mean, the Gaslam win, I'll give him that one. But Hector Lombard, Johnny Hendricks, I mean, these aren't really, marquee wins. And, he gets knocked out by Larkin. He gets submitted by Dos Anjos. I mean, to me, those are fights he should have been a bit more competitive in. But, hey, that's just me.
Yeah, there are several times, like it seems like for years Condit's been like, I don't really want to do this. I'm just doing it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And when Dana White is the positive moral compass in some situations like this, where he says, if you even question, maybe I shouldn't fight, you shouldn't fight. That's saying something. When Dana White is the moral compass of a situation like that, that's kind of telling. Speaking of situations like that, we have a guy in Derek Lewis who had, I thought, one of the all-time worst performances, or one of the worst performances of 2017 in his last fight, coming back, apparently motivated, at the urging of his wife, after he got in the ring and said, I can't do this to my family. And his wife says, yeah, you can. That's how we get paid. So, yeah, you can. And he's going to fight Fabricio Verdum this weekend. We've had Anthony Rumble Johnson this week, apparently talking to the UFC with a possibility of returning at heavyweight. What I'm wondering is, could there be a more possibly unmotivated yet horrifying fight than Derek Lewis versus Rumble Johnson down the line, where a couple of guys may not even care? Like, what are they doing there? But, one could get deaded at any moment.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that matchup. That, sign me up. Of course, Lewis is, probably going to want to get a win there against Verdum this weekend. But nevertheless, exactly. Anyone who moves up to heavyweight at this point, it's interesting because really, Stipe Miocic, as long as he's holding the throne, I mean, there aren't really a lot of options for him at this point, and you need some fresh blood in there. And, we're seeing, I think, both those divisions kind of going through a bit of an influx right now. So I think in addition, like an Anthony Johnson could really make the heavyweight division exciting. Stipe's gone on a great run, but sometimes when these champions keep winning, it's like, what are the options? What's left for them? So I definitely see, Johnson really thriving at heavyweight and making things very interesting.
That kind of all ties in together because we've seen Verdum also unmotivated, but he's said in interviews recently that he knows that in order to put himself in the title picture, he has to get an impressive win. Yeah. Because meanwhile, you have Francis Ngannou and Alistair Overeem, and Alistair Overeem saying that he's been told he'll get a title shot with a win. So if Verdum wants to insert himself into that picture, he's got to win impressively, and he knows that. That will also push Derek Lewis, I think, who is vegan, didn't see that one coming, looks much better than he did just a few months ago, too. I mean, when your main fear in a fight is crap in your pants, yeah, maybe you should switch a few things up. But we got Derek Lewis, who has had problems with motivation, facing another guy who has had problems with motivation, but says that won't be an issue this Saturday. But, then again, like, how can we take Fabricio Verdum's word? His signature expression is a troll face. So,
yeah, exactly. No, not exactly.
So many question marks.
Oh, big time. This is a really interesting matchup. You mentioned the fact that, Verdum, not motivated at times. So how about we talk about his age? He's 40 years old. I mean, at some point, he's got to slow down a bit. I don't really think he looked that way in the Overeem. I mean, Overeem won the last fight, but it was a close matchup. It wasn't a total blowout. He can still compete at this level. I mean, there is a point with certain, like I look at someone like Jacare Souza, for example. I think his age is catching up to him now. We'll find that out when he fights Chris Weidman. But I think that when there's a point where a fighter's, age sort of comes into play. I don't think it'll be in this fight. But one thing we didn't even talk about Derek Lewis is the work he's done, with Hurricane Harvey, and he estimates that he's helped over 100 people. How did that impact his training? I mean, seriously, if he's going into this fight, he's taking time away from training. I mean, that and even just the stress of dealing with that's got to be taxing on him as well. So I wonder if that's going to play a factor in this, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe seeing all that happen, that's a motivator for him in this matchup.
For him to go from that to the scene in Las Vegas. Yeah, I'm sure that was, it's got to be a roller coaster of emotions for the guy. And hats off to Derek Lewis for doing that. It's sometimes controversial in the things that he says, but that is like the stories that I've heard in regards to him, even the ones that he's told, are very inspiring, very awesome. It's very cool to see him stepping out in the middle of a fight camp and doing stuff like that. Yeah, Frankie Edgar, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say he's quite the character. I mean, the heavyweight division needs a guy like him with some personality. If you think about it, there isn't really any guys, that are sort of really standing out in that regard. And Derek Lewis is a very important part of it. But anyways, Frankie Edgar, you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can talk about the heavyweight division a little bit. We're starting to see a lot of new blood, especially in the UFC's official rankings. You got Junior Albini, which I think is one of the greatest stories today going in pro MMA, didn't get paid for his fights until he got to the UFC. Curtis Blades is broken in. You've got Tybura. You've got Alexander Volkov. You have some new names. Now, some of this is because USADA has kind of pushed a few names out of there. Mm-hmm. Arlovsky and Brown shouldn't be ranked, but there they are. But you're starting to see some new blood. But in that, there's often this feeling of like maybe the names aren't as big, and you're gonna have that until anybody gets used to it. But what do you think of some of this new blood here? And you could say the same thing for the light heavyweight division.
Yeah, no, the divisions are very similar. I think that it's just one of those things where you're going to have matchups where, it's going to be opponent that fans know against opponent that fans don't know. You mentioned Marcin Tybura. He's fighting Mark Hunt. I do those pros pick videos. You know how many times I ask fighters who Marcin Tybura is, and they have no idea who he is. But that's the point, is that if he goes out there and defeats a Mark Hunt, you're going to know who he is after the fight. So I think it's you're going to see a lot of those matchups, I think, going forward as they continue to try and build stars, because unfortunately, as we've seen a lot of times in the UFC, you have to be a self-promoter. And if you're not going to do that, you're not going to have fans know who you are. And it's just the reality of the situation.
It's one of the reasons I love MMA, and sometimes one of the reasons casuals hate MMA. They don't know the fighters and stuff, but it breeds situations like Shogun Rua could be like one finish away from being a light heavyweight title contender right now.
It's true. I know it is.
It's so weird, man. That's just such a weird situation to be in 2017 when people thought like he was done at one point.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I mentioned that Bellator show coming up this weekend. I've been singing the praises of Steve Cazzola all week, and I think Carrington Banks they are the right challenge that one another needs.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And there's a lot of really good prospects in Bellator that I'm hoping the promotion will really put some stock into. I don't know if you saw the news yesterday. Logan Storley going to be back in action. Logan Storley is just an outstanding wrestler. He's got a fight coming up here soon. But this is a great matchup just because you're going to have it's going to be one of those fights where the winner is really going to propel themselves up the division. The loser, not necessarily, but the Bellator needs to start building prospects. One of the things that a lot of people don't want to talk about in the Scott Coker era is his inability to build new stars. And you see a lot of times, like, they'll bring in like an Ed Ruth or some of the high level wrestler guys, like Aaron Pico. Well, Aaron Pico's a different example, but someone like Ed Ruth, they're very far away from achieving anything great as far as superstar status. So they've got to focus on these undefeated guys. And you mentioned Steve Cazzola. You and I have both interviewed him. We just need everyone else to see what this guy's made of, because he really has all the tools of being a superstar in this promotion. He's great on the mic. He's obviously a great fighter with the 8-0 record. I really hope they capitalize on this. And, if he does beat Carrington Banks, give him a top flight opponent, give him a veteran, give him someone that people would recognize, like a Josh Thompson or something like that, and get the ball rolling and try and build this up, because it's important, to do that and to give these guys good opportunities. I always look back at the Michael Chandler, Eddie Alvarez fight. Nobody knew who Michael Chandler was other than him winning the tournament, and he beat Eddie Alvarez, and everyone knew who he was. So those are the type of fights you need to sort of build stars in your promotion.
All of us who have covered MMA know what it's like when CJ Tuttle throws a guy your way, Bellator PR guy. You get him on there, and you hear him eating on the other end of the line, or they kind of mumble, and they're like, yeah, good weight cut, good fight camp. But then you hear a Steve Cazzola, and he's energetic, and he's happy, and he's outspoken, and he straight up told me, he's like, I'll fight at featherweight, I'll fight at welterweight, I'll fight at lightweight. Just give me the date, the weight, and who I'm fighting, and I will finish the fight. That's pretty cool. And I think Carrington Banks is the right kind of challenge for each other, because Carrington Banks is a good prospect too. And if Carrington Banks can weather the Steve Cazzola storm, and Steve Cazzola can weather the Carrington Banks storm, or vice versa, that's a good thing. One of the things I do like about Bellator, like really the only way that they can build names is to get them early before they even have UFC interest. And they've done that with like the Ed Ruths and stuff like that. But also the Russians, like they used to have this great crop of Russian fighters, and they've been alienated and almost non-existent at this point.
Well, I think part of that is the Spike TV model, where they want guys who can speak English. Like, I don't think, to be honest, if I'm Bellator brass, you want Darian Caldwell winning that fight, because he's got some personality. He speaks well on the mic. Eduardo Dantas, if the guy could speak English, I'm sure he'd be one of the biggest stars in Bellator. But unfortunately, it's a Spike TV audience, so you need those guys with the personality. And I'm with you there. I mean, it would be great to see them really sign some talented guys outside, but I think that's why they avoid that, and that's why we don't see that. Like the Rebney days, where you had like a Tiger Sarnovsky Volkanovski or like, I'm just trying to remember some of the names they had back then. Yeah,
Frodo Ivanov. I can't believe they let Ivanov go.
Yeah. Yeah, they had some really interesting talent that they just sort of never really capitalized on, or I think they hoped would lose, or they, I know in some cases, like, they'd, fight some guy and then they just cut him loose because they're just like, oh, we have no use for you, rather than keeping him around and letting him develop.
Darian Caldwell, the frame on that guy for 135.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Longer reach than undefeated heavyweight Daniel Cormier.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And one of the things with him that, people don't, I guess, they don't really look at, you look on the resume, he's got the one loss, but that was a fight he was winning and he just got caught. So, people sort of don't think of him as, maybe this big prospect, but this is a big fight for him. And obviously if he wins the title, he's going to be, high up there. But this will sort of make a statement for Bellator fighters in general as far as where they belong. And I think Caldwell and Dantes are two of the talented guys who could very well be in the UFC, in my opinion.
There's a lot of like sub-story to the Strauss, Curran, Timanglo, Caldwell fights because Strauss and Curran have a storied history with one another. Timanglo and Caldwell have history with each other, as you mentioned. Like Caldwell obsessed over that loss and had to get it back and got the win back immediately. I'm interested to see how they respond. Each of these guys respond with one another on the show. Now, I never want to see Strauss and Curran fight again. Like
nobody does, except for maybe them. I don't know.
No, I don't think Strauss does. Strauss told me he was just thrilled to be fighting somebody who wasn't Pat Curran or Pitbull. Like at this point, he felt like his career got into a rut because he was fighting the same two guys for years and years and years.
Yeah, the division's changed a lot. I think that's part of the reason now you're seeing guys. I mean, now it's like they have so many options. Like, how hard was it for Daniel Weichel to get a title shot just because of the fact there's so many guys in the division? So I think that. I mean, thank God we're not having those musical chairs anymore because even I was sick of that. I'm a big Bellator, supporter, and I didn't want to see any more trilogy or any of those fights. It was too much.
Strauss, I would entertain the idea of moving up to 155.
Oh yeah,
we've seen him have trouble. He had to cut his hair to make the weight one time.
Yeah,
but I think there are some more fun, interesting fights. And let's be real, they like Daniel Strauss a lot. We've seen them hold on to guys that they like a little too long, like a Brian Rogers. Like they wanted Brian Rogers to work out real bad, and he just didn't. But they held on to him for a long time. We've got this UFC 216 show, and man, this is a really good show. I'm bummed that Paige Van Zandt, Jessica I got pulled from the show because I thought that was a very underrated fight in the cage, but. On the prelims, we've got guys like Will Brooks, John Moraga, who mainly not to my wife won't know who they are, but maybe somebody who's tuned into a UFC on Fox will.
Yeah,
there are some stories on these prelims that I think are a little under the radar. Will Brooks, I think, has to win.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of guys on here that has to win. Matt Schnell. I mean, he's a guy that had a really good career in Legacy. He was their champion. Went on the Ultimate Fighter. Had a very good fight with Tim Elliott, and then of course has had two disappointing fights. In the UFC. So I think he's a guy to keep an eye on as well. I just think that there's a couple people on here like Pearl Gonzalez needs a win in my opinion. I think she had a lot of hype going in. Didn't have a great showing against Calvillo. There
were a lot of aspects of that fight. I mean, she wants her name to be tied to something else besides Implant Gate.
Yes, that too. Again, the gravity of that. I mean, how is she going to? I think we're really going to see her.
No pun intended. The gravity.
Yes, exactly. But I think we are going to see, a much better fight from her this time around without all those distractions. And she's buried pretty hard on the prelims here. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what they go with. But
before Demetrius Johnson straight up said, if Ray Borg doesn't make it to the fight, I'm not fighting. There was a real good possibility we might end up seeing UFC 216, Johnson versus Schnell.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Like just anybody they could fit in there. Because before he said that, because I thought that maybe he would just take a fight to beat somebody, get that record. I was saying, like, if I'm a flyweight on this show, I'm trying to hit the championship weight, not the 216 or a 126 rather. Yeah, I'm not trying to make that. I'm trying to make championship weight just in case. But Talis Leites, Brad Tavares, that's a nice booking too for where they are in their careers. I think that's a good one. Heavyweight fight, you never know if it'll go the full 3 rounds and be a snoozer, or if Godbeer or Harris will put the lights out on each other in 20 seconds. There's always an appeal there. Will Brooks, Nick Lentz, that's a good one. Bobby Green, Lando Venata. My
Fight
God.
of the night. Fight of the night. I'm calling it
My
right now.
God.
That's going to be fight of the night.
How do you not put that as the main event of the prelims or just on the pay-per-view?
Yeah, I don't know the thinking on that. I think it's I think sometimes they put those matchups kind of buried down underneath. So you know, if you're the casual fan watching it, you're gonna somehow want to buy the pay-per-view, I guess. I know the main event slot would probably make more sense on the prelims, but who knows? I know that there's some strategy involved there because I think they know how good these two guys are as far as, you know, putting on an entertaining fight.
Can't wait for that fight. That's probably outside of Ferguson Lee, probably the most excited I am for a fight. We have Beneil Dariush and Evan Dunham, and it's so weird to see Evan Dunham at this stage where he's found a lot of success, hasn't fought in a long time, but he's no longer that 27-year-old prospect that Dana White's calling unbeatable. And then right after that, he got exposed by Melvin Guillard and like the performance of Melvin Guillard's life. But after that, you know, his career, he went okay for a little while. Then he started to fight the tip top of that division and really struggled. This is, I think, a good opponent in Beneil Dariush to see if he belongs right in this spot.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those matchups where you know, both have sort of been disappointing. Dunham is on a 4-fight win streak, but if you look at his career throughout, I mean, he's had those big fights and he hasn't come through. You know, and Dariush, I mean, 2-2 in his last 4 fights. Granted, look at the opponents he was fighting, but again, a guy who I think a lot of people felt like was going to be a contender, and he really just hasn't lived up to that. He's, you know, had a couple setbacks. So really, it's a, you know, can the veteran still remain relevant in the lightweight division, or can this prospect really show that he does belong there as well? So I'm very intrigued by that matchup, and I see a lot of people. I know Dariush is the favorite in this fight. I think Dunham might pull this one off, to be honest.
Would this be the biggest win of Dunham's career? And it's weird to say
I gotta look back. Maybe. I mean, he
should have beaten Shirk.
Yes, she should have beat Shirk.
And he beat like Tyson Griffin, but that was, you know, Tyson Griffin hit or miss. But you had guys like Gleison Tebow, Ross Pearson, Joe Lozon, guys who always hang around. But Beneil Dariush has been pretty solid throughout his UFC run. This might be because might be the biggest win of his career, but because he lost to TJ Grant, Dos Anjos, Cerrone, Barboza. The top of that division, he has run into a lot of trouble with those guys. And like I said, you know, the Melvin Guillard fight, I feel like if Melvin Guillard had fought any human being on that night, he was going to win. I've never seen him look better. That there was no stopping him on that night, and I thought that Dunham rebounded very well. But he's been out of the cage for over a year, and he's 35. Dariush has shown some glimpses of brilliance, and then lost to Barboza. That's going to happen in Brazil. Yeah. You're going to occasionally run into a knee from Barboza in Brazil from time to time. But
yeah, Chiesa, he was winning that fight, and then he got caught. He's had a couple fights like that, like the Ramsey Nijim fight. Remember when Ramsey knocked him out? I mean, I forget what type of the betting odds were on that. But
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, he was a huge favorite in that fight, and he didn't end up coming through. So, I mean, if you're a prospect, you got to win those fights. So, I'm telling you, if Dariush can't beat an Evan Dunham, I think you know, we might have to put the bus label on him, because he should beat an Evan Dunham, in my opinion.
This is the best division. God, that 155 division is so good.
Yeah, it really is.
It's just unbelievable. When we're talking about a guy on a 4-fight winning streak against Beneil Dariush, and we're like, is one of them a bust? It tells you how good this division is.
Yeah, and you know what's so cool is that this division's been strong forever. I mean, you just go back to when Dunham was first in the UFC. I mean, you had guys like him and Tyson Griffin and Clay Guida and Roger Huerta. Like, at the time, it was really popping. There was lots of stuff going on. You had Sean Shirk, you had Kenny Florian. Like, it's to see where that division's gone now. It's still maintained. Everything, despite, you know, guys like Edgar dropping down, like Henderson leaving the division. It's a very strong division, you know, for the weight class. So, yeah, it's been very exciting to see.
Man, Roger Huerta, that was a fall from grace.
Big time. Remember, people forget this. Remember when Bellator signed him, and that was like their big signing back in the day, was like signing him, and then he had and then he lost to Pat Curran, and it was over.
Yep. As I look through his record, man, he's had a tough go of it.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him, but he you know, took too much damage, and now I think it's game over. He's with ONE FC, fighting, you know, once every 3 years. So it's one of those things. This was a guy. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
I'll never forget. He was like, I will never lose again, and then he lost 2 in a row and got bounced from the UFC.
Yeah.
And you know, when you look back at those losses, it's like Florian, Gray Maynard, Pat Curran, Eddie Alvarez. well, you know, they're just better fighters. They're
Yeah,
going to
that's
beat
true.
they're going to beat 90% of guys in the world. But yeah, man, that was, you know, he had almost completely escaped my brainwaves. He's still a year younger than Evan Dunham,
I
which is
know.
weird to think.
It's
Really
weird to
weird to
think
think.
that Dunham's still even kicking. I mean, you look at the guys that were in the division with Dunham. I don't think there's like anyone really that's still sticking around at 155. That could be a game. You could go look up who's still kicking, because he made his debut. When was it? Like ages ago. Let me see this here. UFC 95, 2009. Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
Per Eklund.
Demetrius Johnson, Ray Borg. The bigger question, what do you give better odds? If you were to set a betting line, better odds, Ray Borg missing weight or Ray Borg winning the fight?
Well, yeah, I mean, the odds would have to be that, I mean, and he doesn't have the nutritionist, right? So now it's even more of a concern. I mean, he'll make weight. I think that there's no way that, I don't know. I'd put, if Ray Borg beats Demetrius, that's got to be one of the biggest upsets ever.
Yes.
And I think the odds reflect that at this point, just because Johnson is getting better and better and better. It's like this, you know, this guy's just, he's head and shoulders above everyone else.
Well, I hope he makes weight, because if not, I'm sure he'll blame it on me on Twitter again. So
what happened there? I didn't see that.
He went off because I've told this story on the show before, but I'll catch you up. Tyron Woodley, after Borg missed weight, there was a talking point on UFC, the weigh-in show. Yeah. They said, should Mighty Mouse wait for Borg? Yeah. And Woodley said, well, if he were a repeat offender, I would say no. And I quoted Tyron and tweeted him and said, you know, he's pulled out or withdrawn or missed weight in 5 of his last 7 fights.
Okay.
And Tyron was a good sport about it. He said, where are you in my ear giving me stats? Yeah. And Ray Borg went off.
Well, it's true. I mean,
off. Yeah. He was like, why don't you come to a fight camp and I'll come do your job? And he misspelled your. And I was like, well, I hope you don't do my job. You got to spell your right. But I mean, if it was my job to make a certain weight and I had agreed to it, I would do it. Not definitely more than twice out of 7 opportunities. Like, that's just the thing. He's got to show up and make the weight. Because if for some reason he doesn't, I don't think he can ever fight at 125 again.
No, they'll have to pull a Lineker and make him, move up, or gasl him, or one of those examples where someone's just repeatedly missed weight. And especially for a title fight like this, like, man, does that ever look bad? Like, they've had so many issues with certain fighters pulling out and stuff. It just looks bad. It's like one of those things that MMA fans and everyone just will never forget. It's like missing weight is like the cardinal sin.
Yeah, and he's a talented dude. I don't think he can beat Demetrius Johnson. No, I don't know if
anyone can, unless someone from 35, meets them or he moves up. Yeah, pretty crazy.
Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee. This is a banger. I can't wait for this. Tony Ferguson. You talk about turning lemons into lemonade. Is this guy? Every time he's like in a disadvantageous position, he'll like roll out of it or cartwheel out of it or do something and wind up Darce choking somebody. It's miraculous. And then you've got Kevin Lee, who his game is pretty much dragging you down and setting up the rear naked choke, which I think he disguises extremely well. You don't know if a punch is coming or if he's going to snake the arm under. Who do you got in this one?
I got Ferguson. I mean, just on paper, you have to go with the guy who's, fought, a tougher competition, in my opinion. Just well-versed in every area. There's some fights with Kevin Lee, and I'm a big Kevin Lee fan. Like, I've interviewed him, a bunch of times. Just a really, really, really nice guy. A guy who's very mature for his age, but I just think he's going to have too much here. You just look back at the Trinaldo fight. That was a fight where Lee wasn't looking so hot. And then he goes out there and he gets the knockout. And the Chiesa win, a little controversial as well. Maybe a quick finish there. He just doesn't have the experience that Tony Ferguson has had. Tony's been put in every, bad situation. He's fought the tough of the tough. He sent Rafael Dos Anjos, the former champion, packing to 170. I mean, he's been in every type. And even fights where, he was in trouble, he still pulled it off. Look at the Danny Castillo fight when Castillo was holding him down. Ferguson was still able to, inflict enough damage to win that fight. So I think experience plays a lot in this. I just think there's no one in that division like Tony Ferguson, what he can bring to the table. And I just think that Kevin Lee's only chance, I think, is to really knock him out. I don't see him being able to submit him or anything like that. Tony's just too crafty. But I will say this, for business, I think the UFC's got to hope that Kevin Lee wins this fight, because as much as we love Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee can sell some tickets.
Yeah, when you got Kevin Lee on the mic and you got Tony Ferguson on the mic, well, one, Tony Ferguson wears sunglasses, and all the time, and he's a little weird.
Yes,
he's out there,
and that doesn't translate.
He's an unusual dude. Like, the sooner I don't have to hear Tony Ferguson talk, the better, honestly, because I don't know how many times I got to listen to him give career advice to people. You got to fight these people. You gotta bleed.
Yeah.
You got to look through a telescope and see your future. You got to do it. I don't want to hear that anymore. I'm so beyond that. Yeah. I'm so beyond it. And man, he's such a talented fighter, such a good fighter. I hate that we didn't get to see that Khabib fight, but you know, I'm not as pumped for this, but I think it's going to be good. What kind of business do you think this UFC 216 show does?
I think it does pretty well. There seems to be a lot of buzz. I mean, you have to wonder too with, you know, unfortunately the tragedy, if that's going to impact the card at all, just because it is so close together. You know, some people said they should have canceled the card. I mean, you know, I don't know. There's a whole debate on that, but I think it will do quite well. I don't think you see any sort of staggering numbers here. You know, a lot of people unfortunately still don't know who Kevin Lee is. You know, I know he did headline a fight night card in his last fight, but in general, he's not really a household name. Neither is Ferguson, to be honest. I mean, he doesn't just have that cachet. And, you know, Johnson, even though he's making history, he's just never translated well to the fans, to certain fans, I should say, because a lot of people really respect him. But I think it'll do reasonably well. You know, ballpark wise, I couldn't give you a number, but I'll just say it'll do okay, but it won't do anything special. Let's put it that way. I
really always have thought that they should have just showcase Mighty Mouse Johnson on commercials, beating the shit out of dudes way bigger than him.
Yes.
Like in training. Something like this. You've always got those bar people that are like, well, I could beat Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. He's 145 pounds. No. I don't care. You're going to get your ass kicked. That's just how it goes down.
Yeah. No, and they never, and then sorry, one other thing I gotta say, they never capitalize on his whole video game obsession, you know, with Xbox and all that. Why are you not tapping into that? Pretty much, I would argue that, you know, the majority of UFC fans own an Xbox or at least play video games. Why are you not tapping into that? Why not have him play against fans as like a regular thing? Like, why did they not I don't know.
Twitch is huge to the point to where I considered moving this podcast to that platform.
Yeah.
Like, as opposed to YouTube. It was a real, like, thing I had to weigh regarding revenue and all that stuff. I was like, you know what? Twitch is that big. I had fighters telling me to do it. I had wrestlers telling me to do it. There's wrestling companies that moved to Twitch. I'm sure that they could capitalize on that. There's just, for some reason, there are just some companies that are behind on certain things, and I don't know if UFC quite gets it about the video game thing. Maybe there will be one, like, not ahead of the time, one mind in that company that steps up and says, okay, we should do this. Let's hop on this. But until then, it's really unfortunate that they haven't, because I mean, Ronda Rousey was promoted for a long time as, can she beat up Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah, that was a talking point.
That was a talking point.
Yeah.
That was a thing.
Yeah.
Man. So weird. And we've got this looming Conor McGregor implication over this show. What do you think the fact that he said, now he watches everything. Let me just say that, get that out of the way. He watches everything, guys. He just doesn't always publicly say, I'm watching this fight. But the man watches like almost every bit of UFC content he can get a hold on based on my interactions with him. What do you think it says that he publicly went out during one of his media appearances and said, okay, maybe these two guys are worth looking at, when before he had never uttered Tony Ferguson's name, really?
I think it's to just to keep himself relevant. And I also think UFC is probably like, hey, do you mind mentioning this? You know, we got a pay-per-view coming up, and you know, the last time you tweeted something or, you know, whatever, it like broke records on Twitter. So just kind of help us out with this one. You know, we let you go do the boxing thing. You know, come on, just meet us halfway here.
Well, it's like, you know, if Ben Affleck, Tom Brady, Robert Kraft, Mark Wahlberg, Guy Fieri, Flea, Anthony Kiedis, none of those guys want to tweet about the company they technically own part of. Might as well have that Conor McGregor dude do it. Maybe Mark Wahlberg gave him his shares after all.
Yeah, and you know, and just on that note, I mean, what you can't take what Conor says for face value. I don't think he fights. I mean, I don't know. I think it's the Diaz fight, and then maybe something else, and then I don't know how much longer he's going to be in this. But I'd be very surprised to see the winner of this fight Conor. And I also think, you know, when he says stuff like, "Oh, I'll fight Khabib in Russia," that's never, ever, 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 ever happening.
No,
ever. How
comfortable would you feel putting a lightweight title on the line against Nate Diaz. And I don't say that because of like any like he's not worthy. It's would Nate Diaz ever fight again?
Yeah, it's all about the money at this point, and I think he's played it well, that he's held out. I'm sure the UFC's given him fights in between, but he wants the trilogy fight. He's gonna, it's like you got to hold out. That's how you make the money, right? That's why Pacquiao Mayweather took so damn long, because they wanted more money. So it's one of those things where I think that he's gonna do this, and if he beats McGregor, then yeah, I don't know. I think for him it's all about the money. If they're gonna pay him the money, he'll fight. If not, then he's gonna just hang out.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And you do have an interim champion if you do that fight and the winner does not come back. You do have an interim champion to go on, and they can run their mouth and say, well, Conor didn't want to fight me, Nate didn't want to fight me, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, people say this was a dumb move. I don't disagree with I'm not a fan of titles, but I think in this case where you have, Conor and Diaz fighting, you got to let the division kind of move on, and, say what you want about Kevin Lee deserving this title shot or not. It definitely makes it more intriguing that there is a title on the line here. I think there was a, smart play on their part with how, we don't know when this Diaz McGregor fight's going to happen. And yeah, I think, champion not defending his belt for more than a year. I mean, that's, that's worthy of an interim title.
Yeah, it really feels like this division has been at a complete standstill. No McGregor, no Ferguson or Habib because of all the injuries that happened. Even the fight earlier this year, Eddie Alvarez's fight that went to a no contest. It's like, well, that kind of what got accomplished there. And Justin Gaethje not really put on the shelf that long. I thought it was great how they sped up the tough process, so that was good. Yeah. He was really maybe the biggest thing that happened in that division outside of the Kevin Lee Chiesa fight. Nate Diaz on the shelf, Michael Johnson moving to 145. Ali Quinta, you never know if he'll fight again. Like on any given day, he's always in and out. Anthony Pettis plays hokey pokey with the division. He wants to go to 145, then come back. So it's weird that there's so much talent in this division, but for the last year, it's really felt like everything's just stayed the same.
Yeah, it really has. And, it's interesting they chose Alvarez and Gaethje as coaches, because really you could have done Gaethje and Ferguson for this title fight, and you could have put Lee on The Ultimate Fighter. I almost don't know why they didn't do that, but I guess to sell this fight, nobody knows who Justin Gaethje is outside of UFC fans. They don't. I mean, that's just the reality of it. He didn't have a Wikipedia page up until I think about a year ago. So, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where you have to, people talk about the fact that it's turned into an entertainment sport. I get this one because, again, if this was Edson Barbosa and Tony Ferguson, no one would care as much. The fact that Lee's in there popping off, making his comments, he's selling this fight. That's a big reason why a guy who's ranked number 7 is in a title fight now.
We can kind of draw comparisons to this Dominic Cruz, Jimmy Rivera fight that's booked in December. Yeah. Not a lot of people know who Jimmy Rivera is, but he's a contender in that division, and he is somebody who is going to be a big part of that division's future. Dominic Cruz has battled foot issues, plantar fasciitis specifically, over the past year, and I think that's a rough thing to battle in that division particularly, especially his knee injuries and stuff, with his type of fighting style, with all the angles, with all the footwork, with the speed. Do you think that will catch up to him and maybe Rivera takes this win? It's not as clear-cut as it would have been a few years ago.
And the layoff. I mean, I know Cruz is, shown that he's like the one fighter where, you can come back after a couple of years and still get an impressive performance, but it has to catch up to him, right? I mean, fighters, the injuries and the layoffs and things like that, those do add up at a certain point. And I think Rivera is still not in his prime yet. I think this is a guy that continues to impress. He had a tough fight in his last one and he went out there and took care of business, and he already has the win over Uriah Faber. So I think they know what they're doing here. If Rivera gets the win, he's really earned it, because again, he's beat, Faber, Almeida, and now it would be Cruz as well. And that's what you have to do. You have to give these, yeah, no one knows who he is, but at some point you got to give him a big fight. So you do make that name. And I think this is a good matchmaking on the UFC's part. I know some people don't like it. Forget him. They haven't watched Jimmy Rivera fight, if that's the case.
Edgar Holloway booked officially. Showdown Joe was supposed to talk to Frankie Edgar on Monday for our Holy Smokes MMA podcast interview, which you guys can check out Tuesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, one of our flagship shows. And Edgar kind of canceled on him, and I was like, oh, that's a bummer. Then we found out why. He had a fight announcement literally minutes after they were scheduled to talk. This is a big fight for Holloway, and McGregor Claws gifted the UFC too by really promoting putting over Max Holloway, a guy that he beat with a torn ACL at one point, by saying, yeah, this is a guy I could fight in the future too. You all should watch out for him.
Yeah, excellent match. This is the best fight in Holloway, especially with what Edgar just did to Yair. It's unfortunate. I mean, maybe not unfortunate for the fans of Detroit, but it's too bad they couldn't have tried to make this happen in Hawaii. That would just implicate with that. I feel like, we don't know. I mean, styles make fights, right? Like when I first saw this matchup announced, I'm like, Holloway probably takes this one, but I don't know. I mean, it's one of those matchups where you really don't know what's going to happen in the fight. Edgar's that guy, the one guy. You talk about exception to the rule with Dominic Cruz. How about Edgar? He's a guy that's getting older and he seems to still maintain a high level of competition. Now at 45, before it was 55. So a very exciting fight. And again, Max Holloway just getting better and better as well, finishing Aldo in his last fight. That's probably got to be one of the best fights this year, I would think.
Yeah, there's some good fights throughout the end of the year, and there are not a lot of weekends off from UFC. There's news that Shogun Rua underwent knee surgery in Brazil. That's a bummer that just emerged today. What do you think that means for his future and his career? Because like I said, he was it was funny because when I said it earlier this year, I said one John Jones USADA test away from a title shot. That test just came a little too late.
Right.
But he's a guy that's still in the top 5 in his division. And like I said, has won 3 in a row, but that's bad news. He's had knee problems before.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The story of his career is 2 things: injuries, and 2, maybe not being as motivated as people would like, not in the best shape in some of those matchups. It's really unfortunate when people see Shogun's UFC career, even though he did win a title. You could almost say in some ways it's been kind of disappointing, especially with the run he went on in Pride. You really thought this was a guy who's going to, keep an undefeated record or something along those lines, but it just hasn't happened that way. If he's got another knee surgery, he's got maybe a fight or 2 left, and I think that's it. And it's and again, with this division and how few contenders there are, he could come back and get a win over someone and really make noise. And they should do the OSP rematch, but who knows if he'll be able to wait that long, depending on how long the surgery is going to take him out. But I think we're going to see maybe 1-2 more fights at a Shogun, and that's it. He's going to head off back to Brazil.
Before we go, I want to talk about the funny trajectory of some Ultimate Fighter cast members.
Perfect.
If in 2014 I were to come up to you, James, and say, in 3.5 years, Jessamine Duke's going to fall out of the UFC, but she's going to be involved in an integral WWE storyline. And so will Shayna Baszler. By the way, that Matt Riddle guy who was on Tough and smoked himself out of the UFC, he'll be the hottest thing in independent wrestling. Oh, by the way, Roxanne Modafferi, she may be the odds-on favorite to become a UFC champion in 3.5 years. What would you have said to me?
I would have said you're crazy. I would say, what the heck's going on? I mean, it's so weird how all those situations have sort of unfolded. I mean, Jessamine Duke just has had one of the worst runs in the UFC. Not to the fault of her fighting tough competition. She just did not perform well. And Baszler, I think, just got in a bit too late. Good for them for finding something outside of that. And for Matt Riddle, same thing. I think Matt Riddle was just one of those weird cases where the UFC just had this. I don't think they liked him, and with the whole marijuana thing and. They booted him out, but it's a shame because had they just stuck with him like they did with like a Nick Diaz, because Diaz did a lot of things.
Yeah.
Who knows where he could have been at this point? Because Riddle's very talented, but hey, he's made other roads and found other success. He's one of those guys I think has shown that he can be successful at a lot of different things. So MMA, never a dull moment in MMA, Sean. Honestly,
right?
It does not surprise me at all to hear of weird things like this.
I get the feeling before Matt Riddle is 35, the UFC will want to offer him a fight for some reason. I think he'll probably be in
Bellator too.
Yeah, I think he'll be in WWE by then, and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, let's fix this bridge that we burned. Let's get that ready." The Jessamine and Shayna thing, good for them. I'm glad they found an avenue. I think that training with who they trained with after they left their local areas really, really hurt them. I think he hurt a lot of people, honestly, Ronda Rousey included. So glad to see that they're finding something else. Fightful broke the news of Ronda Rousey training in pro wrestling. Glad that she's going to give that a try too, because I think that her judo skills translate very well. There's stuff that she could do that will look fantastic in a pro wrestling ring that wrestling fans have never seen before.
Yeah, and
Like,
just
so.
the name value that she still holds. I mean, you go on Instagram, there's still people posting photos of her all the time, and she's not even fighting. It's crazy.
And we're seeing the crossover happen a lot. Like, a lot of people are looking at Matt Riddle specifically and saying, okay, this is something I can do. Stephan Bonner is going to wrestle on Impact's biggest pay-per-view of the year in a couple weeks, or in a few weeks. Against King Mo, ironically, and Bobby Lashley. Those three are a couple of crossover guys. Tom Lawler. You've seen a lot of people do that, so I think that's a good avenue to go. James, anything else you want to address before we go?
No, I think we pretty much covered it as far as all the news goes. Again, great weekend of fights. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope all our listeners here enjoy the festivities because, this again, we just talked about the UFC card. We didn't even talk one matchup. Just quickly, I'll mention just because I'm so excited. What a great fight that's going to be on Saturday.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. Which one?
Oh, Tom Duquesnoy and Cody Stamann.
Oh yeah, my God, that's a tale of two prospects right there. Two big prospects. And this will be one of those fights that kind of derails a guy for a little bit, but it won't surprise me to see the loser of this fight like reel off 5 or 6 straight wins after this.
Kind of reminds me of Carrington Banks and Steve Cazzola, same sort of thing, two really, and I don't mind these fights. Sometimes people say, oh, you're killing a prospect. Sometimes that's what you need to do to get a guy that much faster to the top. And I'm a fan of that matchup for sure. And again, don't sleep on Cody Stamann. Never been finished in his career, and he's got that 15-1 record. So he's no slouch.
The cream rises to the top eventually.
It certainly does. Yeah, for sure.
Guys, of course, we have live coverage and discussion of Bellator, UFC, and WWE Hell in a Cell all this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You can go to our forums. You can go to the live discussion page where I'll be talking as well. Of course, our Twitter, at Fightful Online and at Fightful MMA. Live post-UFC 216 podcast with myself and Showdown Joe. We will also talk the Bellator show. And, of course, the post Hell in a Cell show. Guys, if you all don't mind, share our stories, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, anything like that helps. We're still a very young site trying to get out there. But James, we are so happy to have you aboard, my friend.
I'm so happy to be aboard. I'm so glad this all worked out. And of course, as well, I'm going to be full-time freelancing. So I'm going to have lots of time, lots of content to be contributing to the site. I'm so thrilled about this. I've been a big fan of Sean and the site in general for a while. So it's just cool that we can finally join forces. And your listeners definitely got to check out. I'm going to be doing a lot of interviews for the site, and can always follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. I got to plug that, of course. But no, it's a blast, man. I can't wait.
I've told Jimmy for a long time, and I was like, this guy is the next Ariel Helwani of MMA journalism. Like, you tracked, to the point to where, like, there were guys at Bellator NYC who were like, I'm only talking to James because he's the only one that was considered enough to talk to me before. Like, you have a real knack for that. Also, little did you know that when I was in Canada, you were on our reality show, The Ultimate Writer, where everybody who actually showed up to dinner got a job with Fightful.
Yes,
and you were the only one. So
that's true. Yeah, and now you got an even better excuse to come back up to Toronto. Now there's 2 people, Well, I guess I was already here, but we got to, we'll definitely do something up and come back. Unfortunately, the Jays are not playing right now. It's they didn't make the playoffs. But what are you gonna do?
Hey, you know what? It's hockey season. I'm trying to force myself to be a hockey fan.
Okay.
I like the Blue Jackets, but I feel this connection to Toronto, the city of Toronto. It's a wonderful city. Yeah. So I will be back there. But guys, make sure you follow James at Lynch on Sports, correct?
Yes, you got it. LYNCH.
Follow me at Sean Ross Sapp, and follow us at Fightful Online. Until next time, guys, we are out.